G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day, a fantastic Friday, leading into an even better weekend. Now today, as always, we do have a lot to speak about. We're going to look at a number of strikes, a number of vehicles being used, and planes coming down as well. Of course, we'll look at the maps in the north, the east, and the south, and give our assessment of what is happening there and have a look at where things are moving. But I think that there is a race happening here. Of course, Ukraine has the initiative in the north, in Kursk. Russia has the initiative in the direction of Pokrovsk. I think the race that we're seeing occur is who has to deploy reserves from one of these frontline elements first. Can Ukraine hold the initiative in the north and force Russia to move troops away from areas in the east or the south to bolster the defences there to stop then that front line moving? Or can Russia continue pushing in areas in the east and in the south and then force Ukraine to pull troops away from Kursk to redeploy defensive works there? And I think that is the race to see who can force the other side to redeploy their forces. But we'll talk about more of that in a second, and we'll talk about a lot of POWs being taken and the advantage of having POWs in swaps as well. So I was just scrolling Twitter as I do, and this video came up, shared from Mr. Rob Lee here, a video of members of Ukraine's SSO 8th Regiment fighting in New York. Now, this is the opening scene 1 second in. I see this, and this is something very concerning. So this was the first opening scene. This, to my eye, is a K-51 riot control grenade. Something we have seen used throughout this war, but is, of course, against the Chemical Weapon Convention. Now, does it matter that it's chloropicrin, which is the active ingredient, riot control or not? Not to the treaty. And I've spoken at length about this. We see both Russia and Ukraine dropping these. Of this top one, Russia, this bottom one, Ukraine, and where Russia and Ukraine have signed and ratified the Chemical Weapons Convention. And these are clearly banned under that. And to even get a better idea of that, I spoke with a combat engineer, of course, with CBRN, chemical, biological, radiological training, as well as an international criminal lawyer, just to see if I was correct or not, and to clear up some things about the use of drones, surrendering chemical weapons, and all of this. If you want to watch that, I will link all of this then below. But let's bring this up to have a look here. And then we see a number of articles over the past months too of Ukraine then really against Russia's use of these. And of course, one being used somewhere does not mean it's right somewhere else. So Russia uses chemical ammo against Ukraine defenders, the K-51 aerosol grenade. This under the Chemical Weapons Convention and Geneva Protocol, despite prohibition. The Russians have used these grenades many times. The photo above is a K-51 canister. We can see the bottom then here. I'll bring up a better photograph of it here. Ukraine's General Staff reports surge in Russians' use of chemical weapons in conflict. Now asking me, happy to be incorrect, happy to be corrected, and I'll correct myself. Looking like the same thing to me. I probably wouldn't put that in my opening scene of my video. So before we look at the other strikes, challenges, HIMARS, I also then want to talk about these POWs. Now, what we have seen throughout Ukraine's incursion, the offensive actions into Kursk, is a lot of Russian POWs being taken. And a lot of these are border guards, conscripts, and then surrendering, and Ukraine's getting a lot of people to then swap back. So let's have a look at some of the footage that has came out over then the past, say, 12 to 16 hours. So we see a lot of then these prisoners held then in this like storage shed here, and it's around 100 by the footage. We can see some drone footage here as we zoom out, the amount of these guys then on the ground, these Russian soldiers here. Let's zoom out further. So guys being taken then prisoner and back inside this storage shed. Now, one thing which is being asked about this footage is this footage from Ukraine has rolled into this area and then taken 100 guys have surrendered at that point, or is this a collection point, a rendezvous point for POWs from other areas, maybe even over past days? Now, that isn't clear from the footage one way or the other. Was this all in one hit, the 100 guys in one hit had surrendered, or Is it a collection point, they RV here, and then taken back across to Ukraine as well? So again, not 100% sure on this, but I'll show you where both sides are talking about this too. Something else being questioned, I've been questioning this a lot, and I will just say I don't know, is what is the exchange rate for troops? Is it one conscript for one volunteer, highly motivated troop? Because a lot of the time when we see POW exchanges, we don't see equal numbers. We'll see 30 for 50, or we see WNBA for the Lord of War. But with soldiers, we do see a difference in that. And an officer or a pilot is going to be significantly different to a conscript too. So it will be interesting to see, and we'll probably get a better idea of this down the line too. But conscripts, they hold a lot of value too, because of course, a conscript has not volunteered to be there. Their families know that their son hasn't volunteered to be there, and this can cause a lot of rift within a society too when conscripts are being killed or captured, particularly then on your own territory also. So a lot there for Ukraine to swap back at some point, and they'll be looking to get more experienced guys back, I am sure. So we do have the clearest footage of a HIMARS system being taken out in Sumy. So just before we watch this, I'll show you exactly where it is. This is actually where it is struck, not where it is in the beginning of the footage, but we see Sumy Oblast, Kursk Oblast, Sudzha, which is confirmed to be completely under Ukrainian control today. So then right in here. Now, let's then watch the footage. So we see it fire off some missiles in the beginning here. This is being tracked by a Russian drone in the air. Once it's fired this salvo of missiles, we then see it driving back. Again, if you want to watch this whole thing, go and watch it on my Telegram if you'd like. Driving back, pulls into then this area, and then we see a Russian Iskander M then strike this. And then we do see the subsequent cook-off of this. No, this is not a decoy. So then we see it, or if it is a decoy, it's just as expensive as a real one. How good is a decoy till it is just real? And I'm joking. Anyway, so we see this cook off here, then we see another vehicle then rushing to the aid then of this burning vehicle, or maybe straight on past. So very interesting to see that. We have seen very limited footage of HIMARS being struck. Of course, a lot of claims. As well, just randomly, I saw this. This isn't the right footage. This one here, this is a Ukrainian tank operating in the Sumy Oblast here and firing, and then it is actually struck as well by, said to be a Russian Iskander. Now, we can actually tell this is in, it might not be the directly same spot, but you can tell by the tree line, the environment around here, this is a very, very similar area. So we see this is where the HIMARS was struck, and if you compare the two bits of footage, compare the pair, no one other than Australians will get this, you can see it is definitely in the same area. So there is, of course, a lot of ISR assets as these drones overhead and having successful hits on Ukrainian assets there too. But we can see, this is me trying to balance to show the strikes on one on the other so people don't go, you only show this. There has been a pilot killed, confirmed by fighter bomber. Pilot and sniper Major General Nikolaevich has died. Now, I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is a Su-35 aircraft back here. So if there are any recent claims of Su-35s going down, we can then line this up and go, this is likely what then has occurred. But I want to talk about this Challenger 2, as this has caused a lot of stir online, whether it is or is not a British-made Challenger 2 operating in the Kursk Oblast, then inside of Russia. Now, we see the opening footage here, and then we skip through the footage, and we can see there are some hard cuts in this going to different areas, and then it is struck, said to be by a Lancet, subsequent cook-off and destruction of the vehicle. Now, many will say, and this is, we see this in a lot of Russian footage, it's really bloody annoying, is like a hard cut, go to a complete area, or a massive zoom out. Now, there is a hard cut in this, but what I will say is if you look at the light in this image, this is like golden hour, either in the morning or in the afternoon. And the lighting is actually very similar in the beginning and the end. You can see the sun is low on the horizon and really gold. So we know at least this footage was taken around the same time. And by the tree lines, it is looking like very similar areas too. Of course, it's still somewhat unclear by this footage. So I'll just show you here the screenshot of the beginning of this footage. This is where people are pointing at as Challenger 2. Of course, turret very large, gun sits well off the front of a Charlie 2, but this isn't completely clear from here. We get a little bit more. This is the aftermath of that strike, and you can see where the targeting system is and the cupola as well, that it is lining up fairly closely to a Charlie 2. We have an overlay of one here, and it is looking again fairly close. I don't think anything here is, a 1,000,000% that, but again, looking fairly close to my eye. And we do have a lot of more mainstream media talking that there has been the deployment of British Challenger 2 tanks in then this incursion. So I think it's likely that it is. And this is only the second time we have actually really seen Charlies being used. And the reason I bring this up, and I believe that this is important, isn't the vehicle itself being taken out, being used. That's not the important part of this, but we have confirmation they're being used. And we've been hearing for a while now that the Challenger 2s would be strictly used for breakthroughs. So maybe we are seeing that. Maybe we're seeing a lot more thrown in. We have questioned how committed to the Kursk offensive is Ukraine. Is it an offensive across, get some areas, pull out, open somewhere else? We're not sure, but seeing vehicles like this that we know Ukraine doesn't have in large numbers, they are fairly rare, we don't see them deployed that much. Could it be a further commitment of willing to put in assets there, as you know you're going to lose these assets? Now, this is similar to like when we saw the Abrams popping up around Avdiivka. If Ukraine is deploying these limited high-tech tanks into areas where there is a risk of then losing them, then we can say that this is likely a very high priority mission being conducted. So it may tell us about the commitment to this. You put in your best kit where you're willing to lose it, but where you can get a lot of gains also. So let's talk about planes. Now, this is a Tu-22M supersonic bomber aircraft, sort of like the Wish.com of a Tu-160, I believe, at least by looks. But then we do see footage of one of these said to have then a technical malfunction and is on fire and then comes to the ground in an impressive fireball. And we have more footage of this, of course, burnt up on the ground. Now, where did this take place? Well, this took place way out here in Kursk, which is a hell of a long way away from Ukraine, around Mongolia. So there's no weapon system that Ukraine has that could go this far to strike a bomber like this. So most likely is a mechanical malfunction. I've spoken about fighter aircraft before, bomber aircraft. These are not your Toyota Camry. These are more like a Formula One car. They can have a lot of technical malfunctions, especially these older planes. These are very long in the tooth now, being used more and more to drop bombs now for, into their third year of war, that they could see a lot of maintenance issues, mechanical problems popping up like this. Now, Fighter Bomber did say the main thing is that we are alive, confirming the downing of this, saying that the crew was alive. An interesting part with this is these ejection seats actually get launched out the bottom of the plane. So you hear about pilots who say they're an inch shorter after ejecting upwards. I wonder if maybe you can get an inch taller from coming out the bottom. But that is an interesting bit of footage, and we have spoken about with the increased intensity of the air campaign, will we see an increase in maintenance issues on these planes? That has been spoken about for a long time. So let's push then up into the north and see where things are changing. Of course, here's Ukraine in the center. Here's the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 14. The blue areas is new territory taken by Ukraine or recovered by Ukraine within 2 weeks. So we come up into the Kursk Oblast here. This map is not the best map for this, but just to show you, we can see there has been an increase of grey zone and blue zone then today, but just to then this amount. So just a smaller amount today than we have seen in previous days. And this is shown as well if we jump onto the Noel Reports map, he's doing a lot more of the mapping of this area than, say, Deep State. You can see, so these are some of the large swaths of land taken on the 13th, the 14th, the 8th. We can see this is the only change on the 15th. So there is just a much smaller change compared to previous days. We have been hearing in here that there is rotation of Ukrainian elements in here, both for fatigue and casualties as well. And this could really slow down advancements for a few days, as well as now that Russian reinforcements are starting to arrive and that Russia is starting to dig in areas, we could see this slow down, particularly from what we saw at least in those initial days and last week also. So we'll just keep an eye on what is happening in here too. But I spoke about this redeployment of forces. So let's look at this. This is from the ISW. The Russian forces are maintaining their relatively high offensive tempo in Donetsk Oblast, demonstrating the Russian military command continues to prioritize advances in eastern Ukraine, even as Ukraine is pressuring Russian forces within Kursk Oblast. The Russian forces are continuing to pursue a tactical encirclement of Ukrainian forces southeast of Pokrovsk. So in Pokrovsk, this is what we spoke about in the beginning, that I believe there's a race on to see who sort of has to give in first and then pull forces. So we see yesterday was a good map to see this. We can see the amount of ground being taken out around towards Pokrovsk over the last week. The Russian advancement is still then occurring. Here we'll look at the maps of this specific area in a bit. The Ukrainian, this group forces spokesman, Captain Dmitry Likovy, stated on August 15 that there have also been no significant changes to the Russian force grouping in southern Ukraine, and the Russian forces are not decreasing their offensive operations in the area. The maps tend to show this. Russia has begun moving certain elements from Ukraine to respond to the situation in Kursk Oblast, but the types of units that they are redeploying and where they're redeploying from is a strong indicator that the Russian military command is still prioritizing ongoing offensive operations in eastern Ukraine. So we have spoken about this. Could be the best action in defense is the best defense offense, that if Russia just go balls to wall down in the east, that Ukraine may need to pull troops away from Kursk to bolster that, and therefore it's going to be easier to recover ground than in the east. But is Ukraine doing the same thing, that you find a weak spot in Russia's border, you push through, and they may have to redeploy forces? CNN said two US officials stated the Russian military command has redeployed multiple brigade-sized elements up of at least 1,000 personnel each from unspecified areas to the Kursk Oblast. Two sources familiar with Western intelligence reportedly stated that the Russian military command is not moving larger and better trained elements from unspecified areas of Ukraine to Kursk Oblast. So unspecified areas, this could be, is it just somewhere in the rear? Is it somewhere on the front? But we are seeing that front continuing to move. ISW has not observed reports in the open source that the Russian military command is redeploying entire brigades from Ukraine to Kursk Oblast, but has observed reports of elements of Russian regiments redeploying to that area. The ISW continues to assess that Russian military command is pulling select elements of Russian irregular units from Donetsk Oblast to address Ukrainian incursion into Kursk Oblast, but will likely be extremely averse to pulling Russian military units engaged in combat from priority sectors in Donetsk Oblast out of concerns about slowing the tempo of Russian operations in these areas. So regular units, you might be talking SF units, you might be talking drone units. That's the two that come to mind. So maybe redeploy some irregular units here. And we have seen, just because on a piece of Ukrainian or Russian drone footage it has then the brigade they're from, that doesn't mean that entire brigade is there. It just may mean that attached drone team has then moved. And we spoke, I want to say about 4 days ago, about how that can be part of the information campaign too, to try and show that where units may or may not be moving from. But I believe there is a bit of force to try and get Ukrainian forces or Russian forces to redeploy and make it easier to have offensive or defensive actions in a specific area. Now we have a lot of Syriac write-up about what is happening in the north. So let's jump back on this. We'll compare the pair. We'll compare the maps. We'll have a look at then this movement here. So we can see similar then directions out on the east here. It can be a bit difficult to see, but where Russia has made ground and that Sudzha has come under complete control. In the last 48 hours, Ukraine army were able to drive Russian army out of the eastern part of Sudzha and take control of the suburbs of these. The Ukrainian presence in the locality of Mikhailovka could also be confirmed reports in the last days. In addition, Ukrainian forces recaptured these and several kilometres to the south. On the other hand, Russian forces counterattacked and regained control of these localities down in this region in here too. So areas that were out and in control, again, very liquid around here. Ukraine's still gaining some ground. After a week of the Ukrainian offensive on Russian territory, the Ukrainian army has taken control or established presence in 58 localities, including the town of Sudzha, reaching 680 square kilometres of Russian soil. Depending where you listen to, Ukraine will say around more of 100 localities and a bit around 1,000 square kilometres too. Again, can be very difficult to know exactly what is happening here due to presence and control being different things. The Ukrainian offensive has had an initial success in penetrating poorly defended sector of the border with shortage of detection and electronic warfare means, as well as few military personnel supported by American and European intelligence. The Ukrainian armed forces launched a series of deep attacks on Russian soil with armoured troops and small reconnaissance groups that caused panic amongst the Russian troops, many of whom were recruits with little combat experience and could be seen in the videos on the first days. What is the purpose of such operation? Far from the stupid statements of those who claim the Ukrainians want to get to Moscow, we are dealing with an operation that has very limited objective, at least in the long term. Again, I don't believe the actual objectives here are clear. Could it have been to try and have some blitzkrieg effort to Kursk? That is what I was told at one point. Could it have been the nuclear power plant? I have never really believed that because of the fallout PR-wise around the world of trying to then occupy a power plant like Russia does down in Zap Oblast 2. We don't really know the goals. Could it just be to draw troops away? Could it be to show the West that, hey, we can make back ground? You need to give us more equipment and show regular Russians and in the Kremlin, hey, we will attack back in also. These objectives are strategic and not territorial and revolve around a small area of the Ukraine-Russian border. We're talking about the Sudaz gas metering station and the town of the same time. Sorry, I've left out one thing there. As well, people talking about a swap back of kilometre for kilometre territory if there is negotiations down the line. The first of these is economic importance at the Eurasian level and runs through this pipeline. One of Russia's main natural gas export pipelines brings in about $6 billion a year for Russia. The capture of the station won't pose an economic problem for Russia, which could cut off the gas supplies to Europe, but would have a negative impact on these states that have not reduced their dependence on Moscow. This would allow Kyiv to have an important trump card in future negotiations with its European allies for the delivery of new military material and economic aid, which could be intensified after this military success. So, we can turn this back on, we can get it going back through, but we need more stuff. Puts pressure on countries which may be a little bit iffy, maybe Slovakia, Hungary, countries like this, to further Ukrainian aid. The second strategic area of the town is Sudzha along the suburbs, as it is the first large town to be taken by Ukrainian troops and would mean the creation of a very important logistical point for Ukraine in the continuation of this offensive, thus compensate for the greater logistical capacity of the Russian troops thanks to the presence of such cities as these larger ones and, of course, Kursk. For this reason, what is happening now seems to be the creation of a buffer zone around Sudzha, where the Ukrainian army is expected to entrench itself in the city and the highlands near the border. In contrast, the Russians west of Sudzha, meanwhile fighting on the northern highlands, will continue the following days, deciding whether the operation continues northwards or stalls. So looking at where these major other areas are, and could Sudzha work as a logistical hub, so elements come into Sudzha and then are distributed outwards of here. This is what Russia's trying to do down in Pokrovsk, very similar but different front. So, of course, into Sudzha, the entrenching systems of Russia, and where the high ground is, where Ukraine will try and gain that. And what is being questioned is, will Russia entrench outside of this and, forgo some land, but then force Ukraine to occupy a large area and a large front line, drawing troops away long term? Will Ukraine continue on this, be able to have those logistics and rotation of elements? These are unknown yet. Or will Russia try and recapture all of this, potentially with a lot of forces in here, and may need to draw forces from other areas of the front to do this? The Ukrainian army is aware that the momentum of its success is beginning to run out after the arrival of significant quantities of Russian weapons and experienced troops to the frontline area, which have begun to slow down the advance in some areas. Once the front line stabilises, which is still several days away, the Russian armed forces will begin to intensify bombardment of Ukrainian troops in the area, which will suffer significant losses if they do not dig in. Kyiv's objective will then to be hold out until winter arrives and wait for the outcome of the US elections in November, when a negotiation process could begin and where maintaining a strip of Russian territory under its control could benefit in a hypothetical agreement that would end the war. Ukraine need to dig in if they want to hold these areas, particularly going into winter where manoeuvre warfare is limited, and that Russia will be dropping things like those FABs and that artillery here as well. On the other hand, Ukrainian operation has not managed to have an impact on other areas inside Ukraine. In fact, the risky move of using experienced troops that were defending the Eastern Front is taking its toll on the forces defending the positions in the Donbass, where Russian forces are making consecutive advances on a daily basis. In reality, it has not been necessary to divert many resources to the Kursk front from there, but these were sent from the rearguard and from Belarus. So we did see elements cross from Belarus as well, and this is similar to what like the ISW was saying. In short, Kursk operations will not change the general trend of the war. The initial Ukrainian victory will be slowed, reversed, while the Russian army continue its war of attrition in Ukraine and on its way to taking over the whole of Donbass. The war sadly continues. So how much effect has this had on other areas? So far, we haven't seen much of that effect, if not actually an acceleration of other areas that where Russia are pushing very hard to, particularly Pokrovsk, Avdiivka, as ISW spoke about, and as I'm about to show you now. So let's come down into Avdiivka. Now, we don't see any change on this map of red. What we do see is a change of grey zone, indicating has been maybe some advancement down to the south out from Zeleny here. Of course, this is getting closer and closer to then Pokrovsk. Now, we have then a Suryak map here too. Situation Pokrovsk. Russian army took control over the localities of these South Railway. In addition, some advances were made by Russian forces at the southeastern outskirts of Horodka, where clashes with the Ukrainian army are taking place. So out in the north in Horodka and down in the south here too. So this is showing it's pushing a little bit further down to the south, but similar to where we saw then the grey zone shift here. So we may see some red movement on this map maybe tomorrow. We then have a Noel reports map here as well. So let's zoom down. Now, this is today of his, and what he is showing is this Russian advancement more in line with what Suryak is showing of this Mykolaiivka, shown in grey zone here, then coming into red zone by his map. So we can say there's probably been most likely some advancement along this sector here, continuing that grind forces attritional warfare here. And like I've said multiple times in this video, will there become a point where there's a tipping point that Ukraine have to send forces back to here, or that Russia has to send forces up to here to stabilize? Now, come into then New York front in here. Now, we don't have any other Suryak map update today, but then we can see from the Noel reports map that he's showing further control out in this area, more control than the deep state is showing. We did see yesterday that Russia had been expanding its control in this particular sector. But let's look at where this map has actually shown some changes today. So we come down, we just see in Krasnohivka that more of Krasnohivka is coming under Russian control after this very slow grind through here. We watched on this channel the break-in from the initial break-in through to the grind street by street, the back and forward in here, but it has been having some success over the past days in here. I thought it would show more than that. We can see where it has had some initial success and getting sliver by sliver in then this front up to then today. Now, zoom out a little bit, and the only other change we see is up then on this Pashani front here, and we do see a Russian advancement towards, of course, this Oskil River that runs through here, which we believe Russia's trying to get to this as a natural barrier to split the north and the south. Now, this is an area which has been coming under Russian control over the past few days and weeks. If we push forward, we can see an advancement through then Better Stove. Oh, wait, need to get back. There we go. So we do see this advancement up through Better Stove here, and then further pushing up to then today near Pashani. So there is initiative and taking ground here too. So where the future of all this holds, I don't know. But what I do know is that we will be here reporting on what then occurs. Anyway, Legends, I hope that you have a fantastic day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.